Most people think that Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism teach the same thing about salvation. After all, we both revere the early church, celebrate the sacraments, and speak of theosis, becoming partakers of the divine nature. So what's the problem? Here's what many don't realize. Some popular Eastern Orthodox views present a salvation formula that skips a key requirement the early church never left out, and that omission changes everything. In this video, we're not going to bash orthodoxy. In fact, we'll affirm much of what it gets right, but we'll also point out where a certain view, faith plus sacraments equals theosis, quietly breaks from the apostolic model. It sounds beautiful, but it's incomplete. This matters because salvation isn't just mystical transformation, it's covenant obedience. It's justification, sanctification, and union with Christ, by grace, through faith, and sustained through moral perseverance. Miss one element and the whole thing collapses. So we're going to walk through the Orthodox formulation, examine it in light of scripture and tradition, and show how Catholic teaching keeps the full picture. If you're interested in deepening your faith, hit like and tell me where you're watching from. And if you find this valuable, consider subscribing to stay rooted in Catholic truth. You can also support the making of these videos, our team, and the tools we use through the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. Let's begin where the Orthodox formula begins, with theosis. In Orthodox theology, theosis, our transformation into the likeness of God, is seen as the purpose of salvation. This idea has deep roots. St. Athanasius famously said, "God became man so that man might become God," on the Incarnation 54.3. Orthodox writers often frame salvation as participation in the divine life through Christ, mediated by the sacraments and prayer. So far, so good. Catholicism affirms this too. 2 Peter 1:4 says we have become partakers of the divine nature. CCC 460 teaches that the Word became flesh so we might become sharers in the divine nature. But here's the catch. Some Orthodox expressions overemphasize theosis to the exclusion of justification and sanctifying grace. When salvation is framed almost exclusively as mystical transformation, it risks losing sight of what the cross actually achieved. The Bible consistently speaks of salvation as being justified, reconciled, forgiven, made righteous, and only then transformed. Romans 3:28 states, "For we hold that a man is justified by faith apart from works of law." This justification is not a mere declaration. It's an infusion of sanctifying grace that restores us to friendship with God. CCC 1992. Theosis flows from that justification, not instead of it. The Orthodox formula, especially when presented as faith, sacraments, and synergy lead to theosis, can imply that transformation is automatic if one participates in the life of the church. But scripture paints a different picture. Even the holiest participation can be fruitless if one doesn't remain in grace. John 15:6 warns, "If a man does not abide in me, he is cast forth as a branch and withers." Jesus is speaking to people already in him, already part of his mystical body. And yet, if they fall away through sin, they're no longer saved. This sets the stage. Without the next piece, it won't hold when life gets loud. Let's look at sacramental participation more closely. A common Orthodox formula says that through baptism and Eucharist, the believer is united to Christ and receives grace to grow in holiness. That's true, but it's not automatic. Catholicism teaches that sacraments work ex opere operato, that is, by the very act being done, but they also require the right disposition to bear fruit, CCC 1128 to 1129. Someone can receive baptism and still fall away later. Someone can receive the Eucharist in mortal sin and actually bring judgment on themselves. 1 Corinthians 11:27 to 29 says, "Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord." Baptism and Eucharist are essential, but not sufficient without conversion of heart and perseverance in grace. That's why CCC 2001 emphasizes the cooperation of human freedom with God's grace. And that's also why confession is indispensable, because when sanctifying grace is lost through mortal sin, only the sacrament of penance can restore it. This is what the Orthodox model often underplays, the radical consequences of mortal sin. Theosis is not possible without sanctifying grace, and sanctifying grace can be lost. Hebrews 10:26-27 warns that If we sin deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful prospect of judgment. If a model of salvation downplays this, it risks fostering quiet presumption, assuming progress where there may be spiritual death. That opens the door. The next part shows how to walk through it. Orthodoxy traditionally honors asceticism and spiritual struggle. Fasting, vigils, almsgiving, and daily prayer are emphasized as part of the path to theosis. In theory, this aligns with Catholic teaching. CCC 2015 affirms the way of perfection passes by way of the cross. There is no holiness without renunciation and spiritual battle. But in modern Orthodox theology, especially in Western academic settings, there's sometimes a softening of moral absolutes. The language of sin becomes more therapeutic, focused on brokenness rather than objective transgressions. Confession may be treated more as spiritual direction than juridical absolution, and mortal sin, explicit rejection of God through grave matter, full knowledge and deliberate consent, is not always clearly defined. That matters, because salvation isn't a general movement toward God, it's a covenant, and covenants can be broken. In Scripture, sin doesn't just make you less holy, it cuts you off from life. Isaiah 59:2 says, "Your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God." Jesus doesn't just say, "Try to grow in me." He says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." John 14:15. So what's the Catholic response? Frequent confession, a clear conscience, examination of faults by name, the use of a structured exam, and full sacramental restoration through penance. Without this, theosis becomes a fog, noble but spiritually dangerous. If you'd like daily Catholic resources right at your fingertips, visit our website or scan the QR code on screen. You'll find daily Mass readings, the Seven Sorrows Rosary, devotional prayers, and Soul Search, a private web app for daily examination of conscience with guided reflections, progress tracking, and secure journaling to help you grow spiritually. Keep this, and the next step multiplies it. Skip it, and it collapses. Now let's look at what salvation is in the Bible. From Genesis to Revelation, God saves through covenant. He establishes a relationship, gives signs and laws, offers grace, and demands fidelity. When His people obey, He blesses. When they betray the covenant, He calls them back, but warns of judgment. This continues in the New Covenant. Baptism is the entrance. The Eucharist is the sustenance, but obedience is the bond. Romans 6:16 asks, "Do you not know that if you yield yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness?" St. Augustine affirms this covenant logic. He says, "He who created you without you will not justify you without you." Sermon 169.13. We are not passive recipients of salvation. We must remain in the covenant through obedience, even while grace is the cause of every good act. The Council of Trent, in its decree on justification, makes this clear. Canon 24 teaches, "If anyone says that the justice received is not preserved, and also not increased before God through good works, let him be anathema." Theosis, without covenant obedience, is not the apostolic faith. It is mystical language, without salvific structure. Catholicism preserves the full vision. God initiates, we cooperate. Grace empowers, but obedience sustains. Sacraments sanctify, but mortal sin kills. So what do Orthodox and Catholics actually agree on, and where do we go from here? Let's acknowledge first, the Orthodox Church holds many profound truths. It guards apostolic succession, reveres the real presence, honors tradition, and nurtures holiness through fasting and prayer. Catholics can learn much from its love of mystery, beauty, and interior life. But we must also say this: a salvation model that reduces sin to dysfunction, softens confession into a consultation, or views transformation without moral absolutes, that model is not apostolic, and it doesn't work. Jesus came to save us, not just to transform us. He came to justify us, to sanctify us, and to unite us with the Father. But this union isn't mystical alone. It's moral, covenantal, and conditional on remaining in grace. If you're a Catholic tempted to view theosis as a replacement for moral effort, don't. If you're Orthodox and seeking the fullness of the ancient faith, consider how the early church spoke of justification, grace, and sin. Start by reading Romans slowly. Read CCC 1987 to 2016. Confess with clarity. Live in grace. Stay in the covenant. If this helped you, share it with a friend, subscribe, and check out our web app for daily Catholic resources and soul search to guide your spiritual journey. Stay close to Christ, and everything else finds its place.